For 25 years, I saw my father as the man who defined integrity. Then one night, I became the accidental witness to his secret life. A woman I didn't know messaged me online claiming she was his girlfriend. I laughed it off until the photos came. Within minutes, I was on a three-way call, listening to my dad console his mistress while leaving me to choke on the betrayal. That was the moment I realized my role in this family had changed forever. I always thought my family was different. When my friends in high school complained about parents who argued constantly, or about dads who barely came home, I would just sit there quietly, almost smug in my silence. My parents had always been the couple everyone seemed to admire, partners in every sense of the word. My dad was the guy who showed up to every school event in a press shirt and with some terrible dad joke ready. My mom was the one who somehow managed to balance kindness and authority without breaking a sweat. Together, they raised me and my younger siblings with a kind of teamwork that felt rare, maybe even unshakable. If you had asked me what a strong marriage looked like, I wouldn't have pointed to some celebrity couple or a line from a book. I would have said, my parents. No hesitation. They laughed easily. They communicated openly. Even during my teenage years, when I pushed back, argued, and resented authority, my parents stayed steady. And when I finally left for college, my relationship with my dad especially started to heal. He was proud of me, and I was proud of him. Or at least I thought I was. Looking back now, maybe there were cracks in the picture. Tiny ones, hairline fractures in the glass that I didn't notice because I didn't want to. Like the way my dad sometimes got vague when I asked about his business trips. Or the way his phone was suddenly always face down on the table instead of screen up like before. At the time, I brushed it off. Everyone has quirks, right? Everyone deserves a little privacy. I remember one particular moment a few months ago. We were at a family barbecue, and I caught my dad stepping away to take a phone call. It wasn't unusual, but something about the way he tilted his head, speaking softer than normal, made me pause. My mom called out for him to grab more drinks from the cooler, and he almost jumped like a kid caught sneaking cookies. I laughed it off in my head. If anything, I thought maybe work was stressing him out more than usual. I didn't want to believe anything else. That's the thing about trust. You don't question it until someone forces you to. And I had no reason to believe my father would ever betray ours. So when the Facebook message came, late one evening as I sat scrolling on the couch, I didn't think twice before opening it. At first it was small talk from someone I didn't recognize. Broken English. Odd phrasing. I assumed it was a scam, maybe a spam account fishing for attention. I nearly ignored it completely. But then she mentioned my sister. And in the span of a heartbeat, everything shifted. My stomach tightened as I reread the line, trying to convince myself it was coincidence, a fluke. It wasn't. It was the first domino to fall in a chain reaction that would tear apart everything I thought I knew about my dad. Little did I know, everything was about to change. The message came in at 9:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was halfway through reheating leftovers, balancing my phone in one hand while scraping cold pasta into a bowl with the other. At first glance, the notification looked ordinary enough. A Facebook message request from someone I didn't recognize. These weren't unusual. I'd been looking for a new roommate, so random strangers reaching out wasn't exactly surprising. The first few lines seemed harmless, almost dull. Hello, how are you? Where do you live? Broken English, stiff phrasing. It had scam written all over it. Normally I would have ignored it, but something in me decided to play along. Maybe boredom, maybe curiosity. I fired back a polite response and waited. Her next messages got stranger. No mention of an apartment. No real direction at all. Just vague small talk, little probes into my life that felt oddly personal. Then, without any warning, she mentioned my sister. My sister's name, spelled correctly. She wrote that her boyfriend often talked about me and my sister. I froze, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Her boyfriend? I asked who her boyfriend was. The reply came back instantly. Your dad. He doesn't talk about me. My first reaction was almost comical. I actually laughed out loud, shaking my head at the absurdity. Obviously a scam. My dad was a senior executive at a massive company. Of course some con artist would see dollar signs and try to latch on. I'd read about these kinds of things. Fake accounts, stolen photos, elaborate lies. It fit perfectly. But then came the photos. 3 of them, arranged like one of those Instagram collages. The first was a beach shot. Her in a sundress, my father standing beside her, unmistakably him. His posture, his smile. Even the polo shirt I remembered helping him pick out last summer. The second was a close-up selfie, their faces pressed together, her arm wrapped around him. The third made my stomach turn, her kissing his cheek, his hand resting casually on her shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stared at the screen so long my food went cold again. My brain immediately scrambled for explanations. Maybe she was a coworker. Maybe she was just one of those overly friendly types, someone he humored for a picture. Maybe, God, I wanted to believe this. Maybe the photos were old, or doctored, or staged. Anything but what it looked like. And right in the middle of my denial spiral, my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. Out of nowhere. Hey bud, how's it going? How's work? I read it twice, pulse quickening. The timing was too perfect. Too calculated. My chest tightened with the kind of dread you can't reason away. The woman was still typing. I could see the dots pulsing on the screen, taunting me. I had a choice. Shut it down, block her, pretend this never happened. Or lean in, see just how deep this rabbit hole went. I took a breath, my fingers trembling as I typed. Yes, of course. Sorry, I just wasn't sure which one you were. I hit send. And in that single moment, I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Because if this was a scam, I'd killed their leverage. But if it wasn't, I had just declared war on my own father's secret. The moment my message went through, sorry, I just wasn't sure which one you were. The tone of the conversation flipped like a switch. The little typing bubble on my screen appeared, disappeared, came back again in frantic bursts. Then the flood arrived. What do you mean? Which one? Who is she? Tell me. Her words came fast, desperate. I could almost hear the panic behind each question. She wasn't just annoyed or confused. She was unraveling. And in that instant, I knew. This wasn't a scam. No con artist would react like that, not with such raw emotion. A scammer would have pivoted, kept calm, tried to reel me back into their script. But this woman? She was frantic. Hurt. Real. My pulse hammered in my ears as I leaned into the role I'd just invented. I typed slowly, deliberately, feeding her enough to keep the fire burning. I invented a name. I invented a city. I invented a story about another woman my father was supposedly seeing. I even added details about how long I'd known, how I'd been conflicted about whether to tell her. Each lie I told felt sharp on my tongue, even though I was only typing. And she believed every word. The more I gave, the more she spiraled. She begged for details. She asked me what this other woman looked like, how long it had been going on, whether my father had told her about his wife. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, creating a fictional affair to expose a real one. Somewhere in the middle of it all, she asked to call me. Please. Voice. I need to hear. My hand hovered over the accept button. Every nerve in me screamed this was insane. Talking to my father's mistress? Who does that? But curiosity and anger pushed harder than fear. I answered. Her voice on the other end was trembling, broken. Between sobs she asked again, who was this other woman? Why would he do this to her? Didn't he love her? Listening to her was like listening to the sound of glass breaking in slow motion. Because through her pain, I learned everything. How long they'd been seeing each other. How often he traveled to meet her. The pet names he used. Details so intimate I felt sick just hearing them. And as much as I wanted to dismiss her, I couldn't. She wasn't lying. The way she spoke about him, the way her grief cracked in her voice, it was real. That should have been my first red flag. The kind of sincerity you can't fake. Still, I played along. I told her I was sorry, that I hadn't wanted her to find out this way, that my father had always been a player, and she wasn't the first. My words seemed to devastate her further, but they also anchored the story. At some point, she asked me if I would do something for her. My heart stuttered in my chest as she explained. She wanted me on a three-way call. With her. And my father. Please, she begged. He won't tell me the truth. But if you are there, he can't lie. I stared at the wall in front of me, phone pressed to my ear, unable to move. The rational part of me knew this was crossing into dangerous territory. But another part, the part burning with betrayal and rage, wanted it, needed it. I heard myself say yes. Within a minute, I was muted on a call, listening to my father's voice in real time as he tried to console her. And that was when I realized the truth was about to get so much worse. At first, I only listened. The line crackled, then settled into the low hum of my father's voice. Calm, measured, the exact tone he used whenever he needed to put out a fire at work or at home. Sweetheart, he said to her, gentle, soothing. You can't believe everything you hear. He doesn't understand. He's upset. That's all. He's just trying to sabotage what we have. Hearing those words out loud sent a chill through me. Sabotage what we have. It wasn't denial. It wasn't confusion. It was a man defending the very thing I hoped wasn't real. She pushed back, voice shaky. But he said there was another woman, that you've been seeing others for years. There was a long pause, the kind that fills a room like smoke. Then my father sighed. He didn't know, okay? He didn't know about me and his mom separating. He didn't know about the divorce. Now he's angry, he's lashing out. That's all this is. You can't take it seriously. Divorce. The word rang in my head like a gunshot. Not once had either of my parents mentioned divorce. Arguments, sure. Stress, yes. But divorce? It was news to me. And to hear it for the first time from my dad, whispered to his mistress like it was a piece of gossip he had to manage, made my chest burn. I clenched the phone tighter. My palms were slick with sweat, my stomach turning. He hadn't even called me after this woman reached out. He hadn't reassured me. He hadn't explained anything. Instead, his first instinct was to comfort her. That was the moment my anger boiled over. I unmuted. My voice cut through their conversation like glass shattering on tile. Actually, I said, my throat dry but steady. I didn't hear about the divorce from her. I just heard it from you. Funny, though, your insecure girlfriend never mentioned it. There was silence. A heavy, stunned silence. I imagined my father's face, that moment when all the masks fall away and someone realizes the game is up. He exhaled, sharp and tired, like a man who'd just been cornered. Oh Christ, he muttered. That was all. No apology. No denial. No attempt to fix the wreckage he'd just left in my lap. Just two words, resignation and defeat bundled together. I didn't wait for him to recover. Didn't wait to hear whatever excuses or half-truths he might scramble for. I ended the call. For a long moment afterward, I just sat there, staring at my silent phone, my own reflection faint in the darkened screen. My heart raced, but underneath the adrenaline was something colder. A realization that cut deeper than I expected. My father had chosen her over me. He knew I'd been contacted. He even texted me to probe for information. Yet when it came time to respond, he didn't reach for me, his son. He reached for her. A stranger to me, but someone he clearly valued more in that moment. I felt something inside me shift. A fracture, subtle but permanent. I called my mom immediately after. My voice shook as I asked her what was going on, bracing for more truths I didn't want to hear. And what she told me next was somehow even worse. My mom picked up on the second ring. She always answers quickly, even late at night. There's a steadiness to her, a way she makes you feel like you're not intruding no matter the hour. But this time, the calm I expected wasn't there. Hey, honey, she said, her voice careful, guarded. The kind of tone people use when they already know something's wrong. I didn't bother with small talk. Mom, I said, is it true? Are you and Dad getting divorced? There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. Yes, she said softly. We were going to tell you soon. We wanted to wait until things were more settled. Settled. The word made my skin prickle. Settled implied time. Discussions. Plans. This wasn't some impulsive decision. They had been working toward this for months. And the affair? I asked, forcing the word out like it was a shard of glass. Another pause. I could hear her inhale. I only found out a few days ago, she admitted. But yes, it's been going on for a few months. A few months. My stomach turned. That meant he was already with her before talks of divorce even began. It wasn't like the marriage ended, and then he moved on. He was moving on while still at home, still sitting at the dinner table with us, still telling Mom he loved her. The bile rose in my throat. I gripped the phone tighter, nails digging into my palm. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Because I wanted to protect you and your sister, she said gently. I wanted us to tell you together, as a family. I didn't want you hearing it from anyone else. The irony almost made me laugh. Because I hadn't heard it from her or from Dad. I'd heard it from her, the stranger who decided to make me part of their mess. I told Mom everything. The messages, the photos, the phone call, the way Dad had comforted his mistress before even considering me. I half expected her to defend him, to tell me I'd misunderstood. But she didn't. Instead, she said quietly, I'm so sorry you got dragged into this. You didn't deserve that. Her apology stung more than anything. Because she was right, I didn't deserve it. Neither did she. Neither did my sister. And yet here we were, all of us orbiting around Dad's choices like debris from an explosion. For the first time that night, I felt something heavier than anger. Disgust. Disgust at my father's selfishness. Disgust that he'd let a stranger invade our lives. Disgust that he'd built an entire second reality while the rest of us lived in the first. I don't know if I can forgive him, I admitted, my voice low. You don't have to. Not right now, she said. Take your time. Figure out what you need. Her words gave me permission to feel the rage boiling in my chest. But they didn't take away the sense of betrayal gnawing at me. Because this wasn't just about an affair. It was about the lies, the secrecy, the way he'd prioritized someone else's feelings over his own children's. I hung up feeling like the ground had shifted under me. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my father, was suddenly unstable. And the worst part? I had no idea just how deep that instability went. After I hung up with my mom, the silence in my apartment felt suffocating. No TV hum, no street noise cutting through the windows, just me, sitting on the edge of my couch, staring at my dark phone like it might explain how the hell everything had unraveled so quickly. Part of me wanted to call my dad immediately, to scream at him, demand answers, throw every accusation in his face until he had no air left to deny it. Another part of me wanted to block his number, delete his contact, and erase him from my life completely. But mostly, I just sat there replaying the sequence of events in my head, over and over like a bad movie. The message, the photos, his voice soothing her while leaving me choking on the fallout. It all felt unreal, like I'd slipped into some alternate version of my family where my father was just another selfish stranger. I opened a blank email draft, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I didn't trust myself to call him, not with the way my chest still burned with anger. Words spoken in rage couldn't be unsaid. But words written carefully, those could leave a mark. At first the sentences came out jagged, fragmented. You disgust me. You let her reach out to me. You lied to us. I backspaced half of it, then started again. What I really wanted was clarity, not just venting. So I structured it almost like a list. That this woman thought it was acceptable to contact me at all. That you probed me with vague texts instead of being direct. That when you realized I knew, you comforted her instead of calling me. That you carried on an affair before the separation, endangering everything. Each point was a knife I wanted him to feel twisting. But behind the sharpness was something softer, something I hated admitting to myself, grief. Because even as I listed every betrayal, I was still thinking of him as my father. The man who taught me how to ride a bike. Who drove 8 hours to surprise me at my college recital. Who cried at my graduation. I closed my eyes, my head heavy in my hands. How could I reconcile those two versions of him? The father I admired and the man I just exposed as a liar. The email grew longer. I told him I didn't care that he and mom were divorcing. I trusted them to handle it with dignity. What I couldn't forgive was his secrecy, the disrespect, the way he'd forced me into the role of accidental messenger between two worlds I never wanted to touch. By the time I finished, my chest felt hollow. I read the draft 3 times before hitting send. The moment it left my outbox, a strange calm washed over me. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had laid out the truth in black and white. Now it was his turn to decide what to do with it. But that calm was fragile, because beneath it lingered the same gnawing question I couldn't shake. What kind of relationship could I possibly have with him after this? I wanted to believe we could rebuild, that somewhere in all this mess, I'd find a way to forgive him. But every time I pictured his face on that phone call, his voice, tender and protective, for someone who wasn't my mom, I felt the anger flare all over again. I didn't know it yet, but the real test wasn't whether he'd respond. It was whether I could live with the silence that might follow. For a few days after sending that email, I lived in a haze of uneasy quiet. My dad didn't respond right away. No angry calls. No defensive texts. Nothing but silence. Part of me wondered if I'd broken something permanently, if my words had cut deep enough that he couldn't bring himself to answer. Another part of me thought, good, let him sit with it. Then, slowly, things began to move. My parents decided to get ahead of the story. They spoke to each of us kids individually, then to the wider family, grandparents, aunts, uncles. They laid out the truth, the divorce, the affair, and even my role in blowing it open. For once, there were no half-truths or hidden angles. Everyone knew. The response was almost unanimous. disappointment in my father. No one tried to excuse him. No one painted my mother as the problem. There was anger, yes, but it was directed where it belonged. For the first time since that night, I felt like maybe this wouldn't spiral into chaos. Maybe we were circling the wagons, closing ranks as a family. And the mistress? Gone. My parents blocked her number, her accounts, everything. Extended family were told to do the same. It was like she'd been scrubbed from existence. I should have felt relief. I should have felt like the nightmare was over. For a moment, I even allowed myself that illusion. I remember sitting with my younger brother in the kitchen, the two of us joking about Dad's terrible cooking, the kind of banter we hadn't shared since before all this. It almost felt normal. The storm had passed. We were healing. But that was the trap, the false resolution. Because then my sister came to me, holding her phone with a look on her face that made my stomach sink. She said quietly, "You should see this." It was a Facebook message request. The timestamp showed it had been sent the night before everything blew up with me. Before the call, before the photos. It was from her. The same woman who dragged me into this mess. Only this time, she'd reached out to my 17-year-old sister. The message sat there unread until my sister showed me. Just a few lines, but they were enough to make my blood run cold. "Hi. I need to talk to you. It's about your father." I took the phone, my hands trembling with fury. The thought of her, this stranger, trying to involve my little sister made my vision blur. I imagined what might have happened if my sister had opened it right away, if she'd been the one to receive those photos, those frantic confessions. She was still in high school, still sheltered in ways I wasn't. It would have broken her. The fragile calm I'd been clinging to evaporated. I thought I'd already gone nuclear on this woman, cut her out completely, ended the game before it could spread further. But seeing that message proved otherwise. She wasn't just reckless, she was dangerous. And worse, my father had thought it was fine to bring someone like her into our lives, to risk exposing us all to her instability. In that moment, any guilt I'd been carrying for tearing apart his affair vanished. If anything, I wished I'd gone harder. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stared at my sister's phone until the words blurred. "It's about your father." 6 harmless-looking words that carried the weight of a wrecking ball. If she had opened that message, she would have been dragged into the same nightmare I'd barely managed to handle. Except she wasn't 25, hardened by a few years of adult life. She was 17, still in school, still living at home, still believing that our parents' marriage was steady ground. The thought of her seeing those photos, reading those frantic accusations, hearing the cracks in Dad's double life through a stranger's filter, it made my stomach twist with rage. "This is exactly why I told him not to contact me," I muttered, pushing the phone back across the table. "He brought her into our lives. And now she thinks she can come after you." My sister looked shaken but tried to play it off with a shrug. I didn't answer. I don't get why she thinks this is okay. Because it wasn't okay. It wasn't even close. I wanted to believe blocking her was enough. That she'd fade into the background, vanish once the fantasy crumbled. But seeing her name pop up again, reaching for another one of us, shattered that hope. She wasn't letting go. She wasn't stable. And that made her unpredictable. Later that night, I called my mom again. I told her about the message, my voice sharp with anger. She sighed, tired but unsurprised. "She's been calling the house phone too," Mom admitted. "We've blocked her, but she keeps finding ways. I even told your father it was dangerous. He says she's just upset, that she'll move on." "Upset?" I snapped. "She's targeting your kids. Does he not see how insane that is?" My mom didn't answer right away. And in her silence, I realized something chilling. Maybe he didn't want to see it. Maybe part of him still clung to the idea that she cared about him, that her obsession was proof of love instead of a red flag. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just about my father's betrayal anymore. This was about someone unstable orbiting our entire family, and my father had left the door wide open for her. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind spiraling. I imagined her showing up at my sister's school, reaching out to my grandparents, sending pictures to my mom's church friends. Each scenario felt more invasive, more violating. I couldn't sit back and hope she got bored. That wasn't enough. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drafted another message, this time not to my father, but to my entire extended family. I explained that this woman was trying to contact us, that she'd already reached for me and my sister, and that no one was to engage with her. I told them if they saw her name pop up, They were to block her immediately. It felt militant, maybe even paranoid, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let her sink her claws into anyone else. And yet, even as I hit send, a thought gnawed at me. Why was I the one organizing damage control? Why was I, the son, stepping into the role my father should have filled from the start? I realized with a bitter twist in my chest that my dad hadn't just betrayed us. He'd abandoned responsibility, leaving me to pick up the pieces. And the more I thought about that, the angrier I became. Because if he wasn't going to protect this family, I would. But what that meant, I wasn't ready to admit yet. I don't remember the exact moment when anger gave way to exhaustion, but I know the night it happened. I was lying on my bed, lights off, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, trying to outrun my thoughts. Every post, every meaningless meme, every headline blurred together until suddenly one froze me in place. A Father's Day ad. A smiling dad, grilling burgers, with his kids wrapped around him like he was the sun they orbited. It hit me so hard I actually dropped my phone. That image used to be my life. That was him. The guy who joked with us at barbecues, who drove across state lines to sit through my concerts, who told me, every single time we said goodbye, "I'm proud of you." For years, I believed those words. I carried them with me like armor. Now, they felt like lies. I rolled onto my side, staring at the wall, my chest tight, with something darker than rage. It was grief. Not just for my parents' marriage, not just for the fantasy of stability I'd clung to, but for my father himself. Because the man I thought I knew wasn't real. Or if he had been, he'd chosen to bury that version of himself under secrecy and betrayal. What gutted me most wasn't the affair. Adults fall out of love. Marriages break. I could have accepted that if he'd been honest. But he hadn't been. He let a stranger reach out to me. He comforted his mistress before his son. He left a 17-year-old girl, my sister, vulnerable to someone unstable. And in doing so, he broke something I don't think can ever be fixed. For hours, I lay there in the dark, replaying his voice on that three-way call. The softness in it, the tenderness, qualities I would have given anything to hear directed at us in that moment. Instead, he'd wasted them on someone else. The bitterness settled deep. I realized I couldn't remember the last time he'd asked me how I was doing without it being about him. I couldn't remember the last time he'd prioritized anyone in this family over his own pride. I wanted to forgive him. God, I wanted to believe there was a version of us that could crawl out of this wreckage, scarred but alive. But every time I imagined looking him in the eye, all I saw was that Instagram photo. His smile too comfortable, too genuine, pressed against someone who wasn't my mom. That smile haunted me. For the first time, I let the thought settle fully in my chest. Maybe I didn't have a father anymore. Not in the way I needed. Not in the way that mattered. It was a hollow realization, one that left me staring at the ceiling until dawn broke pale and colorless through the blinds. By morning, I knew something had to change. I couldn't keep bleeding out in silence, torn between love and disgust. I needed clarity, one way or another. If he wanted a relationship with me, he'd have to earn it back. He'd have to face me, not as the father I once idealized, but as the man who betrayed us. And I had to be ready to tell him exactly what it would take to rebuild, if that was even possible. Because pretending things could ever go back to normal, that was the real lie. I didn't plan the confrontation. It wasn't some cinematic build-up with a date circled on the calendar. It just happened. My father called one afternoon. His name lit up my phone, the same name I'd been ignoring for weeks. I stared at it, thumb hovering over the screen, my chest tight. Part of me wanted to send it straight to voicemail. But another part, the part that had been simmering in silence, drafting speeches in my head at 3 a.m., knew I couldn't avoid him forever. I answered. "Hey, bud," he started, his voice soft, tentative. Not the confident executive tone. Not the gentle fatherly one either. Something in between, fragile. For a long beat, I said nothing. Let the silence stretch until he filled it. "I know you're angry," he said. "And I know I've hurt you. I want to explain." That word, explain, made my jaw clench. I cut in before he could start spinning it into something palatable. "No," I said flatly. "You don't get to explain. You get to listen." The line went quiet. I could almost picture him, lips pressed thin, not used to being told to shut up by his own son. So I laid it out. I told him how it felt to get dragged into his affair by a stranger on Facebook. How humiliating it was to hear about the divorce from his mistress, not from him. How disgusting it felt to realize that when he knew I'd found out, his first instinct wasn't to check on me. It was to comfort her. Do you have any idea what that did to me? I asked, my voice breaking. Hearing you console her while I sat there listening, wondering if I ever meant that much to you? I could hear him breathing on the other end, slow, measured. But he didn't interrupt. I pressed harder. I told him about my sister's unread message, how furious it made me that he'd let someone so unstable into our orbit, that she could have been the one dragged into the mess instead of me, that he had left his family exposed because he couldn't control himself. That's not just bad judgment, I spat. That's betrayal. You didn't just cheat on Mom. You cheated on us. Silence again. A heavy one. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. You're right. The simplicity of it caught me off guard. No excuses, no spin. Just 2 words. But I didn't let it soften me. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my tone sharp. You don't contact me until you can tell me exactly why you did this and what you're going to do to fix it. Not just with Mom, but with us. You don't get to sweep this under the rug. You don't get to pretend I'll forget. If you want a relationship with me, you have to rebuild it from the ground up. Otherwise, my throat tightened, but I forced the words out. Otherwise, I don't have a father anymore. On the other end, I heard him exhale, long and shaky. For once, he didn't argue, didn't beg, just sat with the weight of my words. I understand, he said finally. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. Not forgiveness, not healing, but clarity. I had drawn the line. I had told him what it would take. The rest was on him. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. But underneath the adrenaline, there was something steadier than anger. A grim kind of relief. Because no matter what happened next, he finally knew. I wasn't his silent son anymore. I was the one holding him accountable. In the days after that call, I expected a tidal wave of emotions. Regret, second-guessing, maybe even guilt for how hard I'd gone. But what came instead was something quieter, stillness. For the first time since that night in my apartment, when a stranger's message cracked my world open, I felt like I could breathe without choking. My father didn't call again right away, and that silence, instead of gnawing at me, gave me room to think. For weeks I had been spinning in circles, angry, confused, disgusted, hurt. Now, I had said what needed to be said. The ball was in his court. My mom, on the other hand, grew stronger. Freed from secrecy, she began speaking about the divorce openly, not as a shameful thing, but as a necessary step. My siblings rallied around her. Family dinners shifted, smaller, quieter, missing one seat, but they weren't heavy with silence anymore. There was laughter again, tentative at first, then steadier. She deserved that. We all did. The wider family closed ranks. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, everyone knew the truth. No one excused my father's choices, but no one abandoned him either. Instead, they did what families sometimes do best, held a mirror up to his mistakes, and left him to face the reflection. As for the woman, she faded out once the blocks went into place. No more messages, no more three-way calls, no more attempts to wedge herself into our lives. At least, not yet. But I knew better than to underestimate her. Her instability had already left a mark, and my father's willingness to let her near us would remain one of the deepest scars in all of this. Therapy became part of my routine. It wasn't easy. Finding someone with availability took weeks, but once I sat in that office, I realized how much weight I'd been carrying. The therapist helped me untangle the knots. The betrayal I felt as a son, the anger I felt as a brother, the hollow grief of realizing the man I idolized wasn't the man I had. Piece by piece, I started separating what was mine to hold from what belonged to my father. And slowly, my guilt for going nuclear disappeared. I had worried I'd destroyed something good between him and her, but that was nonsense. Good things don't start in secrecy and lies. If anything, I'd saved my family from more months, maybe years, of manipulation. Especially my sister. That thought alone was enough to silence any lingering doubt. As for my father, we're still no contact. I told him he'd have to rebuild from the ground up if he wanted me in his life. I don't know if he'll try. I don't know if I'll ever be ready if he does. But the difference now is that I'm not waiting by the phone. I'm not carrying his choices like they're mine to fix. Because here's the truth I've learned through all this. Parents aren't gods. They're people, capable of the same selfishness, cowardice, and failures as anyone else. The real mistake is believing they're above it. I still love my father. That hasn't changed. But love doesn't erase betrayal. Love doesn't excuse abandonment. Respect has to be earned, and right now, he's got nothing in his account. So where do I go from here? Forward. With my mom. With my siblings. With the version of family that's still intact and honest. The rest is up to him. When I look back at everything that happened, I realize this story was never just about an affair. It was about trust. About what happens when the person you've always seen as steady ground suddenly shows you quicksand. It forces you to decide. Do you sink with them, or do you find solid footing on your own? I won't pretend I've figured it all out. Some wounds don't close neatly. But I've learned that setting boundaries, even with people you love, isn't cruelty. It's survival. It's the only way to protect yourself and the people who still depend on you from being pulled deeper into someone else's chaos. Maybe you've been there too, discovering a truth about someone you thought you could trust and realizing nothing will ever look the same again. If you have, know this. Your anger, your grief, your refusal to accept less than respect, they're all valid. If this story struck a chord with you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, and sometimes painfully human, make sure to subscribe. Because as you've just seen, the truth always finds a way out.